Hello, listening readers. Welcome back. Today we're getting into Chapter 2 of The Hidden Hunters. Chapter 2, Dovrin. Dovrin stood outside of Neil Baker's room. He was waiting for Henry Baker to come out after finishing reading to his father. The first time Dovrin had come here to observe the room, he'd actually been inside while Henry read to his father. He'd done it for a simple reason. He had been testing Henry. Dovrin patted his pocket where a tiny little carving of an owl sat. That little talisman that he had brought from Zahan allowed him to pass by everyone's notice. So long as he was physically touching it, he was invisible to everyone's senses. They could not see him, they could not hear him, and technically, they could not touch him, although if he accidentally bumped into them, they would be moved out of the way. He tried to avoid that. He was good at avoiding things. That's why he'd been brought into the Council's list of agents. He was good at stealth. He'd been trained that way, practically from birth. His face soured. He tried not to remember that fact, or at least tried not to think about where his skills came from. Remembering that was never pleasant. He shifted as he heard voices within the room. Well, a voice. It wasn't like Neil Baker could talk right now. The first time Dovrin had been there to observe them, he had snuck into the corner of the room and spent the entire time silently observing them. He'd watched as Henry methodically read the book to his father. It hadn't quite been what he expected. He'd initially assumed that Henry Baker, being the son of an escapee from Zahan, would be alert for the possibility of attack while his father was weak, that he would be aware that there could be someone out there looking for him. But the more Dovrin had observed Henry Baker in that room, and in the days afterwards when Dovrin had watched Henry out and about in the wider world, Dovrin had come to an utterly bizarre, but nevertheless quite solid conclusion. Henry Baker was exactly what he seemed to be, just a regular Earth kid. That had baffled Dovrin at first, but there wasn't any other explanation, really. The kid had no defensive sense whatsoever. He clearly had no idea that Dovrin was there. Dovrin had even intentionally slipped up a little one day. He'd never gotten really close to Henry, but one time, when he and his friends had been out eating in a local diner, he'd stopped in for a bite himself. He looked normal. He knew how to dress like someone from this world, how to talk like someone from here. So he looked like just another patron. He'd sat in the corner, simply looking like he was eating his meal, all the while subtly glancing over and watching Henry and his friends. They hadn't noticed a thing. Henry hadn't noticed a thing. Dovrin was sure he hadn't been noticed, as incredulous as he still found that fact. Apparently, Neil Baker had never taught Henry any skills or knowledge whatsoever. As far as he could tell, Henry Baker had no idea about the existence of the world of magic, and how Neil Baker, as he called himself here, figured into all of it. Almost without realizing it, Dovrin shook his head. Apparently, Neil Baker had gone soft, and possibly gone native. He hadn't wanted to bring his son up the way he had been, and therefore never gave him the skills necessary to try and survive if anyone from the old world finally came after them. In a way, Dovrin could understand that. Hells, he even respected it. He understood the desire to leave an old life behind, but doing so was dangerous. There was always the risk that it could make you vulnerable and weak. Dovrin couldn't tolerate weakness, especially around the enemies of Zahan, especially when people like Neil Baker were involved. Even if he was currently unconscious, there could be no mercy shown around them, no hesitation. You had to be on your guard at all times. Dovrin knew that only too well. He knew how dangerous they could be, better than almost anyone. And that was why he watched and waited, and why no matter how long he had to stand there, he would not waver. Slowly, a few minutes of watching turned into 15, then an hour and a half. Dovrin did not care. He just waited and waited until finally he heard Henry starting to pack everything up, opening the door and leaving the hospital room, saying goodbye to a father that could not say goodbye back. A tiny little thing of sympathy emerged in Dovrin's heart as he saw that, but he quickly tamped it down. Maybe he could have a little bit of sympathy for Henry because he didn't seem to share the same sins as his father. But he couldn't be complacent. Slowly, making sure Henry had completely left the premises, Dovrin stepped forward and walked into Neil Baker's room, closing the door so it didn't make a sound. He walked over to the chair that Henry Baker had clearly just vacated and pushed it over to the side of Neil Baker's bed. "That's really quite a son you've got there," Dovrin whispered. He wrestled around in his other pocket and took out a different talisman. This one was a little carving in the shape of a mouse. Dovrin didn't know why the powers that be chose to carve the way they did, to house the spells they did. If he'd been in charge, he would not have let the mind-reading spell be contained within a mouse. But he didn't make the rules. He didn't know how they came up with those images. He just had to live with it. Slowly palming the figure in his hand, he reached out with his other hand and tapped Neil Baker's arm. Within moments, he was inside Neil Baker's mindscape. He opened his eyes and looked around. It was the same as always in here. At first, there was just darkness, but slowly, form by form emerged. Something began showing at his feet. It was water, or at least a mental representation of water. Then came gravel and rock, a shoreline. Trees started dotting up and down the landscape around him. He was at the edge of a lake, a very big lake. He'd been here several times before. Apparently, this was how he preferred mental landscapes to look, since minds formed themselves to the tastes of whoever was breaking into them. One of his old mentors had shared what minds looked like when he was breaking into them. His mentor had described them more like a castle that he was rummaging through, looking through rooms for information. Sometimes the castles were just open, every room begging to be explored. Other times, against people who were themselves skilled in mental magic, it was more like going up against a castle that was prepared for a siege. It was fucking hard to get in, and even once you did, every room in the building would be locked and booby-trapped. You wouldn't know where the information you were specifically looking for was. Dovrin viewed going through mines more as a fishing expedition, evidently. A large fishing pole lay at his side, but Neil Baker knew something about mental defenses, apparently, because this lake was not easy to fish in. The water immediately froze over with a thick layer of ice. He could sense the memories he was looking for out there, just hiding below the surface, but he couldn't get through that ice. Just for the sake of trying, he held up his hand, and he imagined channeling the power of the mouse totem and the mental magic it contained to break through the ice and start dragging out the memories within. As usual, the ice resisted. It seemed to almost resent his trying. After a minute of attempting to penetrate its depths, Dovrin felt himself stumble. He raised his hand to his nose. He was bleeding. He clucked his teeth and imagined the bleeding stopping. He raised his hand again and was pleased to feel nothing this time. He'd been trying this for a while now, but nothing he seemed to do worked. Neil Baker was one of the wiliest people he had ever come across, and one of the toughest. It really shouldn't have been possible for Neil to withstand this kind of mental interrogation. He should have broken by now. Somehow, he was still able to resist as easily as he had the first time Dovrin had come here. Dovrin was sure the memory that answered how Neil was able to pull this off was somewhere under the ice. When Dovrin finally managed to uncover it, reverse engineering the skill might help Zahani leadership go through future interrogations of rebel members faster. Of course, that did absolutely nothing to help Dovrin figure out how to beat it in the present. He stared out at the water. There, just below the ice, he could see what looked like a fish staring up at him. He knew what that fish was. It was Neil Baker himself, taking on a mental projection of his own. The man couldn't stop Dovrin from coming into his mind, but he could make it near impossible to get the information from him. Dovrin paced the shoreline for a while. Well, if Neil Baker wanted to appear like a fish, then Dovrin would just have to treat this even more like fishing. Timing was everything. You could not rush things. He stared out over the water. I just saw Henry leave, he said finally. You should be very happy. You've raised a son that cares about you very much. He looked down at his feet, kicking a pebble over the ice. You really are very loved. That can be a much rarer thing than most people think. The ice seemed to shimmer for a moment, and there was a rumbling sound coming from within. Oh, come on now, Neil. I know you don't like me talking about Henry, but I really just can't help it. Every time I see him, I can't help but be reminded of the kid my parents always wanted me to be. They didn't get what they wanted, but you seem to have. Dovrin imagined a chair that he could sit on at the edge of the lake. Instantly, one was there, and he sat down, resting at the edge of the lake. I don't know how much you can hear when Henry comes and talks to you. I don't know if you can hear him telling you about his day. Do you want me to tell you? Since I spend so much of my time when I'm not here with you, observing him and his friends, hoping against hope that maybe they'll give me a sign that will point me towards any of your former comrades that you escaped here to Earth with. It hasn't worked so far, but it has been entertaining to watch them in a kind of teen drama way, Dovrin said, with a rather sadistic grin on his face. The ice made a sound like it was starting to crack. In fact, for a brief second, Dovrin thought he did see a crack. But then, if it had, it immediately mended itself. That was disappointing. Dovrin sighed. So, I take it you don't want me to tell you. Dovrin smiled again. Well, too bad. Since you're not giving me any new leads to follow, me and my team will just have to keep following your son around and see where that takes us. And then I'll occasionally come here and tell you about the life he's been having while you're not there. And you can spend all the precious time you have in here thinking about that little fact. Below the ice, Dovrin was pretty sure he could see the water roiling. Dovrin knew that he probably shouldn't have said that. Winding up rebels, these followers of the cult of Airmen, had always been a weakness of his. He enjoyed watching them suffer just a little too much. Even if he had his reasons, he knew he should try and rein it back. But somehow, he never did. And his bosses, like Lyra, and now this new guy Theris, never seemed to be inclined to stop him either. Funny how that worked. One might almost think they had reasons for wanting to see that damned eternally smoldering rebellion stamped out too. Not as much as I do, though, he thought to himself. A sadistic smile slipped from his face. No, almost no one could want the rebellion to end more than him. Resigning himself to spend the night once more inside the mind of someone who hated him, Dovrin imagined conjuring himself up a drink, stretching out his legs. He prepared to spend a long night with Neil Baker once more, waiting to see if this was the day he finally cracked. Probably wouldn't be, but that was okay. He hadn't been lying to Neil. At the moment, he had nothing but time. Alrighty. Thank you for spending another chapter with me. As always, please give this video a like and comment if you enjoyed it. Tell us what you liked about the chapter, maybe where you think it's going. I'm really interested to see if people can figure it out the more the chapters go on. And as always, see you tomorrow for the next chapter. All right. Thank you. Bye.